Catherine Blake, the cold and haughty editor-in-chief, on her very first trip outside Manhattan into the countryside, immediately noticed something very strange. The signs of the local shops bore a striking resemblance to the surname of the assistant sitting beside her, Daniel Harper. That coincidence stirred Catherine Blake's suspicion. Could this seemingly ordinary assistant, who had worked by her side for the past 3 years, really be nothing more than a meek, impoverished man? Or behind that patient, restrained exterior, was there a hidden identity? A wealthy heir living in disguise? What Catherine did not know was that this seemingly casual trip to Newport, Rhode Island, would completely change her life. For here, in a seaside stone mansion, Daniel Harper's greatest secret would be revealed, and with it, Catherine's entire cold, arrogant world would be turned upside down. In the heart of Midtown Manhattan, where skyscrapers crowd together and car horns never cease, there stood a prestigious newspaper office called the Metropolitan Journal. It was one of the most powerful editorial offices in the United States, where every printed word could influence the stock market, politics, and even the fate of countless corporations. The woman behind that aura of power was Catherine Blake, the formidable editor-in-chief, a figure both admired and feared. Catherine, 38 years old, had a slender build, her dark brown hair usually tied neatly at the back, and cold gray eyes that could make any reporter tremble within seconds of conversation. In the chaotic world of journalism, she was known as a steel warrior, ready to cut down any article she deemed lacking in weight, no matter how celebrated the writer behind it might be. Employees in the newsroom had a nickname for Catherine behind her back: the Witch. Not because she was unattractive. On the contrary, Catherine possessed a refined, elegant beauty, but because of her absolute coldness in leadership. She never smiled without reason. She never tolerated sloppiness. And she never allowed anyone to challenge her authority. The only person who could stand by Catherine from dawn until late at night without being crushed was Daniel Harper, her 29-year-old assistant, tall and lean, with slightly tousled dark brown hair and calm brown eyes that held an unusual serenity. For the past 3 years, Daniel had been like Catherine's shadow, arriving at her doorstep early in the morning, silently waiting outside her office late into the night. He remembered every detail of her habits, from the light roast Colombian coffee she favored to the specific brand of painkillers she used whenever stress overwhelmed her. But the price of such devotion was not small. In 3 years, Daniel had virtually no days off. He once canceled a trip to attend his grandmother's 90th birthday just because Catherine demanded he stay and review manuscripts. He had run across more than 10 freezing city blocks just to find the exact flavor of coffee she liked. And when he mistakenly bought the wrong one, Catherine immediately punished him with overtime to repay the mistake. Catherine considered all of this as nothing more than natural. To her, Daniel was not an individual, but a perfect tool to keep her relentless machine turning. She never asked if he was tired. She never asked if he had dreams. To Catherine, life consisted only of 2 kinds of people: those competent enough to keep up with her, and those who would be ruthlessly eliminated. The clearest proof of that was Martin Hale, the deputy editor-in-chief, once considered Catherine's right-hand man. In an editorial board meeting, when Martin made an error in fact-checking, Catherine coldly stood up and pointed directly at him in front of dozens of journalists. "He lacks professional ethics. I cannot allow a careless and dishonest man to remain in this room." Her words struck like the sound of a coffin lid being nailed shut. Before Martin could defend himself, Catherine lifted her chin, turned on her heel, and walked away. Her arrogance cut into Martin's pride like a blade. He shouted down the hallway, "Catherine Blake, one day you will pay. Your stone heart will be cursed by love." But Catherine only smiled coldly. She turned back and said, "Listen carefully, Martin. I didn't fire you because you threatened me. I fired you because you are lazy, complacent, incompetent, and spend more time betraying your wife than doing your job." Silence engulfed the newsroom. Martin was left speechless. The other employees shuddered. That was Catherine, a woman who never trembled at any curse. Yet they did not know that behind the closed glass doors of her office, Catherine had moments of solitude, where she hid a deep wound. At 16, she had lost both her parents in a car accident. Since then, Catherine had learned to survive by wearing a cold, unyielding mask. She believed only toughness could keep her from collapsing in this ruthless world. Daniel knew a little about that. Occasionally, in the late nights when Catherine sat alone in her office, her eyes red from exhaustion, he caught a glimpse of another person, fragile, breakable, but he never dared to speak of it. He understood that silence was the only way to remain by her side. To everyone else, Catherine Blake was the unshakable editor-in-chief, and Daniel Harper was just a poor assistant, obediently enduring errands without complaint. But neither of them knew that their lives were about to take a fateful turn, when a small mistake with Catherine's visa would pull them both into a dangerous agreement, and ultimately expose a secret that could overturn everything. In the relentless grind of the Metropolitan Journal, Catherine Blake had never once allowed herself to make a mistake. But even the sharpest minds sometimes slip. In her frenzy to chase deadlines, Catherine had overlooked one small detail with catastrophic consequences. Her work visa had expired. The news struck like lightning. One autumn morning, an envelope from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services lay squarely on her desk. When she opened it, Catherine read and reread the words, "Notice of Deportation," until the ink seemed to blur into her eyes. Within weeks, she would be forced to leave the United States, severing every position, every ounce of power she had built over nearly 2 decades. In a panic, Catherine immediately summoned the board of directors. But instead of sympathy, she heard the chilling whispers. If Catherine is forced to leave the U.S., the editor-in-chief position cannot remain vacant. Martin Hale was fired, but under regulation, the interim replacement could be him. The news cut into Catherine like a blade. Martin Hale, the man she had publicly humiliated, now stood a chance of taking the most powerful chair in the newsroom? Impossible. Just then, the door swung open. Daniel Harper walked in, holding a thick stack of files, his eyes calm, unaware of the suffocating tension in the room. And in that instant, a bold thought flashed through Catherine's mind. She rose abruptly, turned to the board, and declared with steel in her voice, "There's something you all need to know. Daniel and I are getting married." The room fell silent. The directors gaped, mouths open, eyes wide. Daniel stood frozen as if struck by lightning on a clear day. He stammered, "What?" "You and me, Daniel. We're getting married." Immediately, Catherine turned, clutching his arm, the corner of her lips curling into a proud smile. Though stunned, the directors had no choice but to offer congratulations. They understood that a legal marriage would allow Catherine to apply for a green card and remain in the U.S. It was only when the door closed that Daniel yanked his arm away, whispering furiously, "Are you insane? I'm not marrying you." Catherine met his eyes, her voice icy. "Are you sure?" "Think carefully. If I leave, Martin Hale will return, and you will be the first he fires. Your 3 years of sacrifice, your dreams of becoming an editor. all gone. I'm giving you one chance. Either marry me or walk out of here with nothing." Daniel was speechless. He had never liked Catherine, the arrogant, ruthless woman who never cared about his feelings. But the thought of losing the job he had fought to keep for 3 years choked him. The missed family moments, the nights he dashed across the city for coffee, the manuscripts he combed through word by word, would it all vanish? Catherine saw the hesitation in his eyes. She pressed further. "Listen, Daniel. We'll get married. Once the legal waiting period is over, we can divorce immediately. You'll keep your job, I'll get my green card. Mutual benefit. Simple." Simple? For Catherine, everything could be reduced to numbers and cold agreements. But for Daniel, this proposal felt like a sentence. Even so, in the end, he nodded. A heavy nod, like a prisoner signing a confession just to secure survival. A few days later, they appeared at Federal Plaza, New York, the immigration headquarters. The ceiling soared above. Lines of people stretched endlessly, anxious eyes following the stern officers in gray-blue suits. Catherine clutched Daniel's hand, for the first time in her life feeling her heart race with fear. Their case officer, Thomas Reed, a middle-aged man with a square face and piercing eyes, flipped through their file, then looked up directly at them. "If this marriage is solely for immigration purposes, the two of you will face 5 years in prison and fines of up to $250,000. Do you understand that?" Daniel swallowed hard. His hand trembled slightly, but Catherine remained composed. She squeezed his hand and smiled. "We understand. And we love each other. So much that I've decided to join him in Newport this weekend for his grandmother's 90th birthday. That's when we'll officially announce our engagement." Thomas Reed narrowed his eyes, doubtful. He demanded they recount their love story. In that tense moment, Daniel summoned all his courage, crafting a narrative. "After so many late nights working, I realized I couldn't stay away from Catherine. At first it was admiration, but gradually it became real affection. I love her." Catherine glanced sideways, surprised that Daniel's voice didn't waver. He slipped into the role more smoothly than she expected. Yet in those brown eyes gleamed something else: defiance. They barely managed to pass the interview. Before closing the file, Thomas Reed gave one last warning. "Within a week, we will interrogate each of you separately. If any detail fails to match, both of you will go to prison." Exiting Federal Plaza, Daniel exhaled as though escaping a gallows. He turned to Catherine, daring for the first time to demand, "I risked my entire future to save you. I want something in return. You'll help me publish my book. And not only that, I want a promotion." Catherine frowned. "You're dreaming." "I won't." Daniel cut her off. "Then I quit. And when I walk away, you're finished too. No one left to take the blows for you. No one remembering the details that keep you afloat." For the first time in years, Catherine felt herself pushed into a corner. She reluctantly nodded. "Fine. When I get my green card, I'll recommend you." But Daniel wasn't satisfied. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "No. I want you to ask me properly. Say it, Catherine. Beg me to marry you." And in that moment, the most powerful editor-in-chief in Manhattan bowed her head. Her voice rasped, yet rang clear. "Daniel Harper, please marry me." A faint smile crossed Daniel's face. For the first time in 3 years of being belittled, he felt the power in his hands. But he had no idea. The dangerous game had only just begun. The flight from New York landed in Newport, Rhode Island, on a foggy afternoon. Catherine Blake pulled her suitcase as she descended the stairs, her high heels clattering against the damp concrete. To her, anywhere outside Manhattan was the provinces. In Catherine's eyes, Newport was nothing more than a small seaside town, with its salty air and narrow cobblestone streets. But the moment she stepped out of the passenger area, Catherine was surprised. A group of people was already waiting. A silver-haired woman with kind eyes rushed to embrace Daniel. Eleanor Harper, his mother, clutched her son's arm, her voice trembling. "My son, you've finally come home?" Catherine felt momentarily unsettled. She wasn't accustomed to such warmth. In New York, every handshake carried an agenda. Here, Eleanor's embrace held no calculation. On the drive home, Catherine sat beside Daniel in the SUV as it wound along the coastal roads. The wind carried salt through the windows, tangling her hair. She gazed outside and suddenly froze. A sign for a small roadside shop. Harper's Bakery. A few blocks later, Harper's Antiques. Then, Harper's Marine Supply. Catherine's heart raced. She turned to Daniel, her voice low and sharp. "You never told me about your family's businesses." Daniel gave no reply. He only smirked faintly, eyes fixed on the familiar landscape beyond the window. Catherine's question hung in the air, unanswered. The car stopped at a gravel path leading into a vast estate overlooking Narragansett Bay. Catherine stepped out, her eyes widening. Rising before her, shrouded in evening mist, was a colossal stone mansion with Gothic domes and stately white columns, the Breaker's Mansion. Catherine stood frozen. In that instant, all her suspicions crystallized into truth. Daniel Harper, the assistant who had fetched her coffee for 3 years, was no pauper. He was the heir to one of Rhode Island's wealthiest and most powerful families. "Welcome home, Daniel," a deep voice called out. From the marble steps, Richard Harper, his father, descended. Tall, silver hair, neatly combed, eyes stern. His handshake with his son was colder than the ocean wind. 3 years. You abandoned your family, abandoned your duties, to work as an assistant? His tone dripped with scorn. A Harper does not reduce himself to servitude. Daniel gripped the handle of his suitcase tightly, but remained silent. He was far too familiar with that voice. That evening, in the grand hall glittering with crystal chandeliers, the Harper family held a welcome-home banquet. Crystal glasses clinked. The soft strains of piano music floated through the air. Catherine stepped into the crowd, still dressed in her rumpled business attire from the flight. Compared to the women in flowing evening gowns, she looked like an intruder. When Daniel rose to declare, "Catherine and I are getting married," a cheer erupted instantly. All eyes turned toward Catherine, half astonished, half intrigued. The crowd began chanting, "Kiss! Kiss!" Catherine froze. This was only an arrangement, a performance, but refusing now meant risking exposure. She bit her lip, turned to Daniel, and they kissed. It wasn't a passionate kiss, but neither was it entirely forced. For a few seconds, Catherine felt her heart stumble. She couldn't tell if it was from the pressure of the crowd, or if, in some part of her, there was genuine stirring. After the banquet, Eleanor Harper led Catherine on a tour of the mansion. Oil portraits of ancestors hung along the walls, silver heirlooms arranged neatly in glass cabinets, all bearing the mark of a dynasty that had endured for centuries. "This is the family you're about to join," Eleanor said softly, her gaze gentle. "But don't worry. I believe you'll find your place here." Catherine managed a stiff smile. Inside, a storm churned. She had once thought Daniel was just a clumsy assistant. In truth, he was an heir putting her to the test. She, Catherine Blake, the famed New York editor-in-chief, was now an outsider, forced to play a role that was never hers. That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. Outside her window, the waves roared endlessly. Inside, in the opulent room, she felt every throb of her heart. A creeping fear seeped in, that the game of deception she and Daniel had begun might consume them both. The next morning, Catherine Blake descended the grand staircase of the Harper mansion, her high heels striking the marble floor and echoing through the great hall. She had chosen a simple black business dress, the unchanging uniform she always wore in Manhattan. But the moment she entered the dining room, she realized just how out of place she looked. Around the long table draped with a white cloth, the Harper family was already gathered. Eleanor, in a modest floral dress, beamed with warmth. Richard sat at the head of the table, stern as a general. Margaret, the 90-year-old grandmother, carefully poured tea into porcelain cups. Each of them radiated a natural elegance, a poise refined through generations. Catherine sat down, trying to keep her back straight. But when she lifted her soup spoon, it clinked against the bowl with a sharp clang. A few eyes turned her way. Catherine flushed, something rare for her. She was used to high-pressure press conferences, where she commanded the room with her piercing gaze. But here, in this warm family setting, she felt clumsy in a way that unsettled her. After breakfast, Eleanor suggested a family stroll around the town of Newport. Catherine reluctantly agreed. As they walked, she was struck even more. Locals greeted Daniel as though he were a star. "Daniel, you're back?" A flower shop owner waved. "Mr. Harper, when will you stop by my bakery again?" another called. Catherine suddenly realized the name Harper in Newport wasn't just painted on shop signs, it was tied to trust and reverence throughout the community. She, the powerful editor-in-chief in Manhattan, was suddenly just an outsider. No one here knew Catherine Blake. She was only Daniel's fiancée. That label suffocated her, yet at the same time, something inside her stirred. For the first time, she didn't have to carry the weight of an entire newsroom, nor uphold an image of perfection. That evening, the Harper family gathered by the fireplace. Catherine sat between Daniel and grandmother Margaret. The old woman held her hand, recounting stories of the family, of snowy winters in Newport, of a love that had lasted more than 6 decades. Catherine listened, her eyes softening. In a quiet moment, Daniel handed her a cup of hot cocoa. Warmth spread through her hands, and Catherine nodded slightly. She felt her heart lighten. As night fell, Eleanor had thoughtfully arranged for Catherine and Daniel to share a room, according to engagement tradition. Catherine had planned to protest, but under the family's expectant eyes, she could only nod silently. The bedroom was spacious, the large bed covered with crisp white sheets. Catherine felt awkward. Daniel set a blanket on the floor, lying down with his back to the bed. "I'll sleep here." "You take the bed." Catherine lay down, eyes fixed on the ceiling, her heart racing. She, the woman who had made hundreds of employees tremble, now felt small, shy, before her assistant. That night, Catherine tossed and turned. The sound of waves crashing in the distance echoed like a reminder. This was all fake. A fake marriage. A bargain for a visa. And yet, why did her heart stir each time Daniel's eyes accidentally met hers? In the darkness, Catherine suddenly remembered Martin Hale's furious words. "Your stone heart will be cursed by love." Was that curse now becoming real? The next morning, a loud knock shattered the quiet of the room where Catherine and Daniel were staying. Daniel jumped up instantly, while Catherine scrambled upright, her heart racing as though their secret was about to be exposed. The door opened, and Eleanor entered with grandmother Margaret, both faces glowing with excitement. Eleanor spoke warmly. "We've discussed it as a family. Tomorrow, at grandmother's 90th birthday celebration, we'll hold your wedding as well." The air froze. Catherine and Daniel glanced at each other, their faces pale. Wedding?" Daniel repeated, his voice tight. "Yes, right away. She's 90 years old. There won't be many chances left for her to witness her grandson's marriage. This will be the greatest gift to her," Eleanor said, her eyes shining with joy. Margaret stepped forward with her cane, her voice trembling but firm. "Before I close my eyes forever, I want to see my grandson's wedding. You will agree, won't you?" Catherine sat paralyzed. In Manhattan boardrooms, she was always the one making the decisions. But here, before the heartfelt wish of a 90-year-old woman, she could not utter refusal. Daniel felt the same. He swallowed hard and gave a faint nod. Immediately, the household buzzed with preparations. Catherine was swept into the whirlwind. That afternoon, Eleanor and Margaret brought her to a family-owned bridal shop on Thames Street. In a small room bathed in golden light, Catherine slipped into a vintage white gown that had been preserved for more than half a century. The dress hugged her frame, accentuating her sharp yet fragile beauty. Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder, eyes glistening. "You truly look like a member of this family." The words pierced Catherine's heart. She knew she was deceiving such genuine affection. When Margaret brought out a pearl necklace, the family heirloom passed down through 4 generations, and placed it gently in Catherine's hands, tears welled in her eyes. Never in her life had Catherine Blake felt so embraced by unconditional love, and never had she felt such crushing guilt. Meanwhile, at the Harper mansion, the rift between father and son flared again. Richard Harper summoned Daniel to his study. The air was heavy, ancestral portraits glaring down from the walls. "Daniel," Richard began sternly, "you've played long enough. For 3 years you abandoned the family's responsibilities for a charade, and now you're marrying some editor from New York? Do you mean to disgrace the Harper name?" Daniel clenched his fists. "You don't understand. I chose my own life. I refuse to become your copy." Richard slammed his hand on the desk. "There are no copies. Harpers are born to lead, not to serve others. You will stay. You will take over the business, and you will end this marriage." Daniel rose, eyes blazing. "No, this is the first time in my life I've chosen for myself, and I won't let you control me anymore." The tension snapped tight. Richard was silent for a moment, then sneered, "We'll see. Let's see how long you can stand against this family." That evening at dinner, the strain was palpable. Catherine sat between 2 opposing currents: Eleanor and Margaret's warm anticipation, and Richard's icy, challenging stare. The pressure weighed down on her. One slip, and everything would collapse. Afterward, Catherine found Daniel standing alone on the veranda, gazing out at the dark sea. She approached quietly. "They want us to marry for real." Daniel let out a dry laugh. "And what do you think? A farce turning into reality. How ironic." "Daniel." Catherine hesitated, then confessed, "I don't want to deceive them anymore. Eleanor, Margaret, they've been too kind to me. I don't deserve it." Daniel turned, his eyes softening briefly before hardening again. "We're already in this game, Catherine. If we pull out now, everything shatters. I'd rather endure than break their hearts." In that moment, Catherine realized the assistant she had once dismissed carried a heavier burden than she had ever imagined. That night, Catherine once again lay on the white-sheeted bed, Daniel on the floor. But the air between them had shifted. They were no longer boss and assistant. They were two people trapped in a false game, yet bound by the same fear, hurting those who loved them. Catherine closed her eyes, listening to the waves pounding Narragansett Bay. Her heart was in turmoil. This was supposed to be just an arrangement. But why was the line between truth and pretense blurring more with every passing moment? On the afternoon before the wedding, the Harper estate overflowed with light and the bustle of preparations. Newport had never been so alive. Cars lined the cobblestone road, florists and stage hands hurried about. Piano music drifted from the grand hall, blending with lively chatter. To everyone else, it was to be a glorious event, combining grandmother's 90th birthday with Daniel and Catherine's grand wedding. But amid the lively scene, the iron gates suddenly clanged open. A black government car pulled up, and out stepped a stern-faced man in a gray suit, a thick case file in his hand. The air was sliced in two. A servant whispered, "That's Mr. Thomas Reed. Immigration." He entered the hall uninvited, his gaze cutting straight toward Catherine. All conversation ceased. The laughter, the clinking glasses, gone in an instant. His voice rang out, clear as a gavel striking, "This marriage is a fraud, and all of you know it." The hall went silent. Grandmother trembled, clutching the arm of her chair. Eleanor gaped. Richard Harper's brow tightened, torn between shock and fury. Catherine froze, her heart pounding against her ribs, her eyes fixed on the marble floor. Reed opened the file, his voice flat. 3 years as an assistant, suddenly announcing an engagement the moment her visa expired. A love story. How convenient. If I take this to court, you both face prison and heavy fines. Every gaze fell upon Catherine. Her throat dried up. 1,000 excuses flashed through her mind, but none strong enough. Suddenly, Daniel stepped forward. He placed himself between Catherine and Reed, his voice ringing out. "Enough. You can think whatever you want. But the truth is, I love her." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Daniel pressed on, eyes never leaving Catherine. "For 3 years, I've seen everything. The sleepless nights, the times she collapsed and still forced herself to rise. I don't care what you call this, real or fake. To me, it's love." Catherine's chest tightened. He was risking his career, his freedom, just to shield her. Reed narrowed his eyes, lowering his tone. "You can keep lying. But remember, I'll be back, and when I return, every word you've spoken today will stand against you." He snapped the file shut and turned to leave. His footsteps struck coldly against the marble, echoing in the heavy silence. Not long after, the banquet hall filled with guests. White flowers lined the aisle, candlelight shimmered against crystal glass. It was like a dream. Catherine walked in her wedding gown, a veil half hiding her face. Every step felt weighted with stone. She felt hundreds of eyes upon her, expecting a fairy tale wedding. But inside her, a storm raged. Daniel waited at the end of the aisle, his gaze steady but anxious. When she reached him, he took her hand, squeezing as if to give her strength. The officiant's solemn voice began the familiar declarations, but Catherine hardly heard. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, Reed's words still haunting her. "Stay silent, or confess." As the officiant prepared to read the vows, Catherine suddenly let go of Daniel's hand. Her voice trembled, but rang clear. "Stop." The entire hall froze. Catherine lifted her head, tears glimmering beneath the veil. She drew a deep breath. "This marriage is not real. I began it only to keep my visa. I deceived all of you." A collective gasp filled the room. A glass shattered to the floor. Guests breathed sharply. Grandmother's face drained of color, her body shaking. Eleanor rushed to steady her. Richard slammed his hand on the table, his face flushed with rage. Catherine pressed on, her voice breaking. "This is my fault. Daniel should not bear this. I take full responsibility. And I am sorry." Tears streamed down, soaking into the lace of her gown. No one spoke. The violins had long fallen silent. Only the wind outside whispered through the windows. Grandmother's eyes found Catherine, carrying both love and heartbreak. Daniel turned toward her, his face twisted in pain deeper than she had ever seen. He had defended her, risked himself to shield her. And now she had torn everything apart with her own hands. In that moment, Catherine felt her heart shatter. Yet for the first time in years, she also felt she had done the right thing. A heavy silence cloaked the hall. Hearts broken, trust collapsed. This was the price of truth. After her confession before the entire family, Catherine fled the grand hall. Her wedding gown swept across the marble floor, lace tearing, tears blurring her vision, until everything turned into smudges of white. The voices calling behind her, the whispers of the guests, all swallowed by the dizziness consuming her. She stumbled into an empty room, tore off the heavy veil, and gasped for breath as though escaping a cage. She knew it was over. The accusing stares of the guests, grandmother's pain, the disappointment in Eleanor's eyes, and above all, the anguish on Daniel's face. In that moment, Catherine saw it clearly. She had no choice left but to leave. She would take all responsibility, so that Daniel and his family would not have to bear any more of the burden. In the hall, the atmosphere turned suffocating. Eleanor helped grandmother into a chair, but suddenly the old woman began to tremble violently, clutching her chest, her face drained of color. A cry split the room. "Mother! What's wrong?" Chaos erupted. One guest ran to fetch a doctor, another rushed for nitroglycerin pills. The heart attack struck without warning, throwing the family into panic. Daniel knelt at her side, gripping her frail, chilling hand. "Grandma, hold on. I'm here." In the turmoil, Richard Harper stood frozen, his face ghostly pale, stripped of all his usual authority. He whispered, trembling, "No, this can't be." At the doorway, Catherine stood watching, her heart twisted, tears spilling down. She knew she had become the reason this family had fallen into chaos. That night, after grandmother was carried upstairs to rest, Catherine quietly packed her belongings. The small suitcase lay open on the bed, every item placed carefully as though part of a farewell ritual. Daniel knocked. His eyes were weary, his voice hoarse. "Catherine, you don't have to do this. We can get through it." She shook her head, forcing a fragile smile, though her voice quivered. "No, Daniel. This is my fault. I dragged you into this mess. It's time I take responsibility. I can't let your family suffer because of me any longer. If you leave, it only proves them right, that it was all a lie. Maybe so, but at least you'll be free." Catherine stepped closer, her hand brushing his face. In her gaze, Daniel read something he had never dared hope for. Truth, regret, and love unspoken. She whispered, "Thank you for protecting me. But now, I have to go." Daniel gripped her hand, struggling to speak, but then let go. He knew nothing could stop Catherine once her mind was set. The next morning, a car carried Catherine away from the Harper estate. Newport lay shrouded in mist, the sea gray, the pines whispering in the wind. From the window, she glanced back one last time at the towering white domes, where she had found a family, only to lose it. At T.F. Green Airport, she passed through security, her heart hollow. As the plane lifted, Newport shrank beneath her. Catherine closed her eyes, letting the tears fall. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Daniel wandered the empty halls. Every corner, every chair bore Catherine's presence. The rare laugh when she spilled tea, her startled eyes when the dogs barked, the fleeting smile when he handed her cocoa. He realized he had fallen in love with her, without even knowing when. No longer duty, no longer a false marriage. Only a love, real and fierce. Daniel sought out his father. Richard stood on the veranda, gaze distant, face tight after grandmother's collapse. "I'm going to find her," Daniel declared. Richard spun around. "Are you insane?" She admitted before everyone this marriage was a fraud. She destroyed the Harper name. Daniel erupted, unable to hold back. "What honor is there in clinging to a title while forgetting your own son's needs?" "I don't care about that so-called honor. I care about her." Richard stood stunned. Never before had Daniel raised his voice like this. "You can hate her. You can hate me. But I will not lose, Catherine. Not this time." Not ever. Daniel turned and walked away, leaving Richard in speechless shock. That night, as silence blanketed the mansion, Daniel sat in the room once meant for Catherine. Her suitcase remained, a scrap of lace from the wedding gown, relics of a love brief, but truer than anything he had known. He whispered, like a vow, "I won't let you go like this." In that moment, Daniel knew his choice was made. Not family, not honor, but his heart. And his heart, from now on, bore only one name: Catherine Blake. New York, Monday morning. The newsroom of the Metropolitan Journal was usually bustling, but in the wide office at the top floor, the air was heavy. Catherine was quietly packing her things. On the desk lay photographs, commemorative coffee mugs, carefully marked up manuscripts, all being placed one by one into a cardboard box. The deportation order from immigration had arrived yesterday, like a cold blade. Before she could recover, she was forced to abandon everything. The editor-in-chief title she had once worn with pride. This office, the city of New York itself. Employees in the hallway exchanged glances, too wary to speak. Some tried a hesitant greeting, but Catherine only nodded, lips pressed tight. She knew she had no choice. The flight to Canada was already booked for the next day. Catherine took a deep breath, clutching the box in her arms. At that moment, the office door swung open. She looked up and froze. Daniel. He stood there in a simple suit, his face thinner after sleepless nights, but his eyes burned bright, determined. Employees in the hall stopped to whisper. A few recognized him as the man who had gone with Catherine to Newport. Catherine drew a long breath, steadying herself. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" He stepped forward, not giving her the chance to rise. His voice was low, trembling but resolute. "I have to tell you this." Before it's too late, Daniel stood right before her desk, his eyes fixed on Catherine, as though if he looked away, she would vanish. He inhaled deeply, and the words he had held back for so long spilled out. "3 days ago, I hated you down to the bone. I dreamed of you being hit by a taxi, or scalded by hot coffee in a meeting. I thought if you disappeared, my life would finally be easier. But then, we had that trip. Newport, my family, the evenings by the fireplace, our first kiss in the hall. I realized you're not just a cold editor-in-chief. You're someone who has endured so much loss, who hides it all behind steel armor. And I saw that truth. When you stood before everyone, bravely taking all the blame on yourself. I've never been prouder of anyone. You made me realize love isn't about what's arranged perfectly. It's about choosing to stand by each other, even when the whole world is against us. I lost you once, and I won't let it happen again. Catherine Blake, will you marry me? Not to cover up, not to keep a green card, but so we truly belong to each other. Catherine was stunned. Each word pierced the wound in her heart, soothing it and setting it ablaze all at once. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her hand trembling against her mouth. "Daniel, Her voice broke. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the noisy office, ignoring the curious stares outside. He held her hand, his eyes shining, waiting. Catherine sobbed, nodding again and again. "Yes, I will. I was a fool. How could I think I could live without you?" The whole floor erupted. Staff in the hallway clapped. Some even cheered. But for Catherine and Daniel, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. He stood, wrapped her in his arms, their breaths merging as one. A few weeks later, on an autumn morning, a car wound its way along Newport's seaside road. Inside, Catherine leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder, eyes soft as she gazed at the ocean. No more pressure of green cards, no more deception. They returned to the Harper estate, but this time not to act, but to begin anew. Grandmother, recovered remarkably from her heart attack, welcomed them with a tender smile. Eleanor hugged Catherine tightly, whispering, "Welcome back to the family." Richard Harper, once fiercely opposed, stood quietly in a corner. When Daniel took Catherine's hand and introduced her before everyone, "This is my wife, the one I chose with all my heart," he only gave a slight nod. No more arguments, no more authority, only a father, finally learning to let go. As evening fell, Catherine and Daniel sat on the grass overlooking the bay. Small boats glided across the water, the sunset painting it red. Catherine squeezed his hand, whispering, "Strange, isn't it? A marriage that began with lies, and yet it led us to real love." Daniel smiled, tightening his grip. "Maybe because truth always wins in the end. And the truth is, I love you." Catherine rested her head against his shoulder, tears of happiness slipping down her cheeks. They sat together, letting the sea and sky witness their vow. No papers, no procedures, only hearts. A love born from falsehood, yet proven through sincerity. And this time, it would last forever. And that is how everything turned upside down for Catherine Blake. A powerful editor-in-chief who thought she held the world in her grasp, only to be stunned when she discovered the ordinary assistant she had scorned all along was, in fact, the son of a billionaire. From arrogance to shock, from deceit to true love. This story reminds us that sometimes the people we underestimate the most are the ones who hold the greatest secrets. And you? Do you believe that a love born from deception can turn into something real? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to True Tale Time, and share it with friends who love life's unexpected twists of fate. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.